Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast. NFL divisional previews continue. 2 down, 6 to go, and it's all about the hotly contested AFC North on today's program. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, I listened back to the AFC East preview that you did with our good friend Billy, who so graciously stepped in, and I was nervous. I thought I was going to get Wally pipped and be excommunicated from the preview series going forward.
I wasn't even going to mention that you'd no-showed for that show.
Well, I learned from you when you took the opportunity to no-show a couple of Monday shows last year. I figured I liked the idea so much that I was going to take the extra day off, and now I am officially locked and loaded with no travel on the horizon until they hand out the Lombardi Trophy, unless we have the Bet the Board field trip that makes its way back onto the calendar.
I got to tell you, me and another member of your bachelor party had a very fine laugh at your expense due to your travel situation of having wine spilled on you and a bird crapped on you and just inclement weather during your last hoorah before football season.
Yeah, well, that member of the bachelor party also shouldn't throw stones when you live in a glass house. He doesn't listen to the show, but I know one of his close colleagues does. Different discussion for a different day.
He listened last week. He asked me, shoots me a text, he goes, "What do you think about the Jets?" And I said, "Here's the timestamp, bud."
Go ahead and listen to the full 17-minute breakdown of the Jets and decide if what we're saying is something that is an actionable piece, even for the fans that are out there. And speaking of, divisions and looking top to bottom, I mean, when you go through the AFC North, it is definitely a who's who this season. One of the most tightly contested, at least on paper, when you look at the win total spread, 10.5, the tops in the market, 8.5 at the bottom, and a division that sent 3 teams to the postseason last year. So as we always do around here, we'll run this through in alphabetical order, and it just so happens that we have 2 teams with a win total of 10.5 in this one, and we'll get things going with the Baltimore Ravens, whose win total, 10.5, pretty much painted across the board. They are large favorites to make it back to the playoffs, right around that minus 240, 250 range. Slight favorites in the division, although that number has come down a touch. And when we look at Baltimore coming into the 2024 season, I mean, this is a group, Payne, that fell a game short of the Super Bowl despite having the NFL's number 1 defense and MVP quarterback. It was the only team in NFL history that had that number 1 scoring defense and MVP to not reach the title game. Clearly, Baltimore is going to rue their game plan where, hey, look, we can run the football against Kansas City, but let's come out, play chuck and duck, and a Zay Flowers' costly fumble was their undoing. But the roster will look a little bit different. In comes Derrick Henry from the Tennessee Titans to be the bell cow back. They draft Nate Wiggins out of Clemson, Roger Rosegarden to help along the offensive line from Iowa State. But you look at some of the subtractions, and we'll get into these specifically and how they impact each positional group. Tyler Huntley, your backup quarterback, is gone. Backfield going to look different. No J.K. Dobbins, no Gus Edwards, no OBJ, no Devin Duvernay in the receiving room, but most notably the offensive line reconfigured. No Jadeveon Clowney, Patrick Queen, Geno Stone. The list goes on and on. Season starts with 4 of their 5 games against difficult opponents on paper. They're going to have a big rest edge, which you theoretically think could pay dividends. But, Payne, we may as well go to the offensive side of the ball, where Todd Monken's fingerprints were all over this group last year. Lamar Jackson, by virtue of a strong performance in San Francisco, catapulted himself to the front of the MVP race and took home the hardware. But that Super Bowl trophy continues to elude him, and Lamar's going to be operating behind a very different-looking offensive line in the 2024 season.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty unfortunate that Baltimore only walked away with an MVP award for its quarterback last season. It just felt like a golden opportunity that was missed because for us, power ratings-wise, the Ravens were the best team in the league. And you looked at something as nominal as like number of minutes trailed, and Baltimore, trailed the least amount of time all season last year. And you just kind of look at how they plotted through the season. They just beat up on the weaklings, and then they made statements against some of the best teams on their schedule, like the 49ers you mentioned, and the Lions, and the Bengals, Texans, and Dolphins. I thought Monken and Lamar Jackson were in lockstep last year during the regular season. They got out. They built leads. Some of their woes the year before were in the red zone. That improved. And then just in the most important game of the year, when you're hosting Mahomes and the Chiefs, you're trying to get over that hump. I don't know what I watched. It was a terrible game plan from Monken. It was terrible execution from Lamar. And it's sad because you look at Lamar, he was just amazing last year, even as a passer. 5th highest ADOT, 8th in adjusted accuracy. So that combination led to our top-ranked QB in depth adjusted accuracy, if you can believe it. And Lamar's favorite target, Mark Andrews, missed 7 games. And then you think about the value add with Lamar's legs, over 800 rushing yards, basically evenly split between like designed and impromptu. And I also think it's a good omen, just a good vibe this year if you're following that situation. And I know other people have a differing viewpoint, but Lamar's continued to work. He shed the bad weight this offseason. If you remember when we joked around at his peak,
milkshake man,
he
baby,
was 230 pounds. Yeah, 230 hammering popcorn and milkshakes at a presser. And he came into this camp at 205, said he feels agile. And I think that's a big deal because if you actually look at a sector of his running, which is scrambling, the impromptu stuff, his yards per rush have dwindled the last few seasons on scrambles. They've actually fallen off a cliff even larger when he's blitzed. It would suggest he wasn't as quick-footed with the added weight, and he's only 27, right? He's still athletic. He's still fast. I think the path is wanting to avoid being hit, not adding weight to absorb the hits. That's probably for when Lamar's outside of his prime. You mentioned the big question. It's up front, right? And I think if you're fading the Ravens this year, and we have seen some under money in the market, and that's why we're down to 10.5, it's partly because of the offensive line. 3 starters are gone in Zeitler, Moses, and Simpson, and they are all starting for their new teams. Ronnie Stanley is in my mind, fine left tackle. He just hasn't gained that elite 2019-2020 form after multiple surgeries. Tyler Linderbaum is one of the better centers. He's nursing a soft tissue injury heading into the season. And then the other 3 spots leave a little bit to be desired. If you looked at the latest depth chart that was released on Monday, you have Andrew Voorhees and Daniel Faalele at guard with Patrick Markari and Roger Rosengarten, who you mentioned, kind of battling for that right tackle job.
Every time you say Rosengarten, by the way, I think of Rookie of the Year with Henry Rowengartner. Get him out there throwing from the bullpen.
Floater pitch, baby. Voorhees, you probably know, right? He was at USC. He was like a 6th-year super senior. His final 2 seasons were good. He suffered that injury, I believe, in the bowl game. And he effectively redshirted as a rookie. He's going to be 26, making his first NFL start. Faalele is converting to guard. He's been below replacement level his first 2 seasons. Makari is serviceable. Rosengarten is a rookie. Ben Cleveland is now taking the center snaps while Linderbaum is out, but wasn't good enough to really be in the conversation pushing for one of those starting guard spots. Depth is a concern as well. You mentioned the weapons. The most explosive is Keaton Mitchell. He's out for the first part of the season, and that was a guy, I banged the table for Kansas City to draft him. They didn't. And he goes and leads the league in yards after contact per rush and finished behind only Devon Achane in elusiveness. So they need him back at some point, and your hope is that after the knee injury this season, he isn't a shell of himself. Derrick Henry, obviously the splash signing this offseason. It's going to be fun watching Henry and Lamar running that read option together. And the data suggests that Henry has plenty left in the tank. He's in the top 80th percentile or higher in a lot of the key rush metrics. And then you think about him running behind that horrific Titans offensive line the last 2 seasons. So even if the Ravens offensive line regresses, which we expect it to, it should still be an improvement relative to what Henry's dealt with recently. If you look at the Titans, they were dead last in yards per rush before first contact over the last 2 years at .82 yards. So I do think Henry's got enough in the tank. Zay Flowers is, he's our guy. He's electric out there. Led the team with a 23% target rate as a rookie. I joke when I say this, right? It's fun watching him turn the 3-yard pass into 6, kind of weaving in and out of defenders with sharp cuts. I'd like if Monken could maybe increase the route depth this year for Zay. That'd be nice. Rashad Bateman and Nelson Aguilar round out the receiver room. That's where I get a little concerned. Bateman needs a big season. He actually got dinged at Monday's practice, hasn't practiced since, and then suddenly Baltimore signs Russell Gage, so we'll see what comes of that. I don't love the receiver group in totality. I do like Monken's ability to be adaptable. And if you saw last year, the Ravens' 3-wide sets increased by about 35%, but Mark Andrews missed 7 games, and then Baltimore had OBJ. The Ravens also have the 7th largest increase in passing schedule difficulty year over year. So what I am hearing, Todd, when you kind of mash that all together, is that Monken wants to use more 12 again to combat the potential issues at receiver and the schedule uptick in pass defenses, get Andrews and Likely on the field together, something that was really effective for Monken and Georgia on their way to 2 national championships when they were working with Brock Bowers and Darnell Washington.
I mean, look, you'd be foolish not to. We saw what Isaiah Likely could do when he flashed as a true number 1 tight end. Is he as multiple as Mark Andrews? Probably not. But when we talk about the tight end room, I mean, they have a wealth of riches there because even Charlie Kohler provides a unique wrinkle. And we saw some of his pass-catching abilities. But you mentioned Rashad Bateman. I think it's interesting, Payne, because it almost feels like the Ravens are trying to convince themselves through beat writers and players the effuse praise that they continue to heap on him about his route running abilities and what he can do when he's healthy. We haven't even seen flashes of that for a guy that was drafted in the first round out of Minnesota. He's never topped 515 receiving yards in a season, never had more than 3 touchdowns, and now to your point, you bring in Russell Gage, you draft Tez Walker. We'll see exactly what the Ravens want to do after Zay Flowers as a true number 1. Now, when we go from the offensive side to the defensive side, Zach Orr takes over for Mike McDaniel. Orr spent 3 seasons as a player with the Ravens from 2014 to 2016, so he knows the culture in the organization, and he's been a defensive assistant in the NFL since 2017. But DC wasn't the only position that turned over. Some key positional coaches took higher profile jobs as defensive coordinators elsewhere. And one of the things was when you looked at some of the capabilities for the individual players, it's tough to replicate being a defense that was number 1 in sacks, number 1 in scoring defense, tied for first in takeaways, number 2 in red zone touchdown percentage, number 3 in preventing explosive plays, and number 3 in yards per play. When we go through the changing faces on the defense before we get to the coaching philosophy, which player that won't be there, in your opinion, is going to be the toughest to replace? Is it Jadeveon Clowney coming off of the edge? Is it Patrick Queen in the linebacking core, or somebody else we haven't mentioned?
That feels like a loaded question if you've heard me talk about Patrick Queen in the past.
Well, we'll get to more on Patrick Queen a little bit later in the program since he just changed his zip code but stayed in the same division.
Yeah. Losing both is certainly impactful, and probably Clowney a little bit more that now that you kind of think about the other edge situations that are transpiring there in Baltimore. Clowney's like the paid-for-hire guy, but he continues to produce. I still believe the bigger losses for the defense are on staff, right? I mean, Mike McDonald heads to Seattle, and then we talked about it last week with Billy that the D-line coach, Anthony Weaver, took a promotion in Miami, and a couple other guys parted ways as well. And so I don't necessarily know if the Ravens got the exact first choice they wanted at defensive coordinator. And I think the other thing that's interesting here is, like, Ravens fans know this, but the unit really started to regress Wink's last few seasons there, right? Extremely shaky in 2021, finished 28th in schedule adjusted efficiency. And then within one season, McDonald comes in, the Ravens defense is back inside the top 10, and last year, number 1. And number 1 in a ton of categories, which you mentioned. Part of that was Anthony Weaver's defensive line improving its pressure numbers. Some of the young guys developed. Oweh took that next step, and the Ravens finished top 10 in pass rush win rate. It led to those 60 sacks that led the league. I don't know enough about Zach Orr to have a strong stance. He's been in the Ravens system. It seems like something they do, right? Just kind of promoting within to keep that culture. Personnel-wise, again, there's lots of depth on the edge, even with Clowney gone. That was the initial synopsis, but you kind of start to to weed through this a little bit, and it gets interesting. I know internally, Baltimore has told folks they're still searching for the horse. OA has the pressure numbers. Finished 13th in pressure rate last season, had a 16% pressure rate on pass rush snaps specifically. You would think positive regression comes in the sack department for OA because based on those pressure numbers, 5 isn't enough, but he's dealing with an injury right now, and so we got to see how that materializes. Kyle Van Noy had the electric season, finishing top 20 in pass rush win rate among edge defenders. Are you going to get another season at that level now that he's 34? David Ojabo, someone that probably hasn't been talked about enough based upon where he was drafted, but he's dealt with significant injuries back-to-back years. He had the Achilles tear at the Combine, which was unfortunate, and then he tore his ACL. He's only played in 5 games over 2 seasons. Harbaugh thinks Ojabo breaks out. I mean, we'll see. Travis Jones has been the star of camp, more of an edge setter than pressure guy. And then you look at a guy inside in Justin Matabuke, right?
Paid the man.
And that's kind of where I'm going, right? You pair him with Michael Pierce. That is a great duo. But if there was a weak point last season, the Ravens did finish 30th in yards allowed per rush before first contact. And I've been doing this a long time. When I look at Matabuke's pass rush win rate numbers, it doesn't translate to 64 pressures and 14 sacks very often. And that type of production is going to be tough to replicate, especially after you sign for $98 million. You have the 3rd-round pick, Adisa Isaac. He has been out for 3 weeks with a hamstring injury. So suddenly, like, as I'm talking about this out loud, the great depth at edge.
Sounds so great
the injuries now. The injuries are starting to put that into question. Roquan Smith and Trenton Simpson at linebacker. Roquan has had 4 straight seasons of 100-plus tackles. He's just a machine. He is responsible for 23% of the Ravens' registered tackles on rushing snaps. He's an elite tackler. Trenton Simpson is filling in for the aforementioned Patrick Queen. 3rd-round pick out of Clemson. Small sample size, but played well week 18 against Pittsburgh. He runs 4.4, so he should fare well going downhill on blitzes and in coverage. The Ravens secondary, it's loaded. And again, I spoke to someone over there, and they're a little shook because they don't have enough room to keep everybody they'd ideally want to. You look at this group, finished 2nd in EPA per dropback allowed, number 1 in schedule-adjusted pass defense. You have a guy like Kyle Hamilton who's just elite, 48 passer rating allowed when closest in coverage. You can send him on a blitz. You can line him up in the slot. You can play him over the top at free safety. Probably could improve as a run defender and tackler. Marcus Williams is solid. Marlon Humphrey is searching for a bounce-back season, but the pedigree's there. He's still in his prime. Brandon Stevens is solid. Arthur Millette coming off a career year, but let's see what his injury is there. And he was pegged as the starting slot guy. Harbaugh is really mum on injuries. I think you mentioned at the top some of the guys they brought in the draft with Nate Wiggins and also TJ Tampa, 2 of the more decorated corners.
Tampa's interesting because we watch a decent amount of Iowa State football, and I don't know if his game he's got the football smarts. I don't know if the athleticism will allow
fit that
to translate.
scheme well. Yeah, he fit the Iowa State scheme pretty well with the 5 defensive back stuff they were running over there. But both guys were highly thought of, and in the Ravens draft, they just have a good knack for drafting the right players. Now, there's going to be a tick up in quarterback competition, right? You look at the Ravens last year; they played Minshew and DTR and Pickett and Malik Willis and Dobbs and Browning, who was really good, and then Rudolph. And this year, we're projecting a much tougher schedule of passers, right? The Ravens secondary is going to face Burrow twice, Mahomes, Dak, Josh Allen, Herbert, Jalen Hurts, C.J. Stroud, and not in his first ever career start in bad weather. And then you look at the rest of the QB situations. And I know everyone this time of year is like, rah, we're great. But Washington thinks they've upgraded the quarterback position. Cleveland with Watson twice. Pittsburgh believes they've upgraded its QB situation. Play them twice. Denver thinks they've upgraded. You could argue Baltimore plays the 7 best quarterbacks in the league, not named Lamar. And, as I mentioned earlier, you're replacing both the DC and D-line coach and a few other positional guys. You would expect regression in the takeaway department as well. Baltimore's number 1 and number 2 in takeaways, and then EPA generated from those takeaways. So I think there's some regression here, Todd, but Baltimore's still going to be a really, really good defense.
I mean, look, they have been one of the gold standard franchises, not just in the AFC North, but the AFC in general. The one prize that continues to elude them is that Super Bowl with Lamar Jackson, and I think it continues to be that albatross hanging around his neck until they can get over the hump. A glorious opportunity, as you outlined last year, coming up short against Kansas City in the AFC Championship. We'll see if different personnel, they have the right mix to be able to make that happen. And, of course, we'll see the Ravens on the opening night going to Arrowhead to take on the Kansas City Chiefs.
That cost me so much money. That probably was the biggest loss of the season last year.
The loss to Kansas City. Yeah, it was not great.
Yeah.
Not great.
I mean, that was one of the larger movers of the entire season.
Not great in the least to see that unfold the way it did. Now, when we're looking at the Ravens, they're going to have stout competition from the other three teams in the division, and one of them, hoping to go from worst to first, would be the Cincinnati Bengals, whose win total sits at 10.5, shaded to the over, much like the Ravens. They are an overwhelming favorite to make the playoffs as well, north of $2 at a multiple of books, and the second favorite in the division when you look at how the Bengals price has come down a touch from where it was closer to $2. Now, this roster will look a little bit different. They made some additions to try and bolster the defense, brought in a couple of guys they think can help as far as depth on the offensive side, but most notably what's going to aid the Bengals, at least on paper, their schedule difficulty lightens considerably. After falling to last place, they get a fourth-place division schedule. We know there are no easy outs in the division. And, of course, Payne, they're hoping that they can get increased health at the quarterback position and that Joe Burrow will be their starting quarterback for 17 games. Because when we look back at last year, it wasn't just that Joe Burrow had that wrist injury that shelved him a little bit early. He came into the year limping around, both literally and figuratively, looking like a shell of himself, dealing with the calf injury. It's Dan Pitcher that takes over as offensive coordinator. But when you look at this Browns offense, the most notable distraction right now, Jamar Chase not going into camp. I know what he said. I know what Burrow said, that it won't take them any time to get things back to the high level where they need it. I'm not sure I necessarily buy it, even for two guys that have played together as long as they have. Joe Mixon out, Chase Brown and Zach Moss vying for RB1. But when you assess the Bengals offense, where do you identify some of their strengths and weaknesses, knowing that if we hit the rinse and repeat button, the one position group that we've talked about every year with the Bengals going into the season has been along the offensive line?
Yeah, and honestly, if you go back to our last couple Bengals previews, they've been really extensive, right? We were like digging into every nook and cranny on how they can improve to get over that hump. And this year I'm kind of just like, it's simple, right? Like when healthy, Joe Burrow is an MVP candidate. He is just that important to the Bengals franchise. And we saw it again last season, even with Browning playing extremely well, that Cincinnati is a competent franchise when Joe Burrow is feeling good. And when he's not, they're not. And you just kind of think about this in terms of, 4 years now, Burrow has dealt with serious injury at one point or another every single season, right? Rookie year, you go back, it was the rib fracture. And then it was, a complete knee tear, I think, in one swoop against Washington, where it was ACL, MCL, PCL, and meniscus. 2021, he had the dislocated pinky finger on his throwing hand. 2022 was the Super Bowl run year, but he was dealing with an MCL sprain. And then last season, you kind of hinted it was the non-contact calf injury in camp. I believe that came in late July, and then it was followed by the non-contact wrist tear on a short throw against Baltimore. And if you actually look at them last year, like weeks 5 through 11 when Burrow was healthy, I mean, again, this was a top 5 quarterback, pinpoint accuracy. The offense became a little bit more aggressive. If you remember, since he comes out of that bye, and it felt like they hit the reset button and beat 2 Super Bowl contenders back-to-back weeks in San Francisco and Buffalo.
You thought when they beat San Francisco coming out of the bye that they were going to be the team to beat in the AFC.
I mean, they did everything. Now, that game did lead us to a nice Super Bowl prop because they got Burrow's legs involved a little bit, and that was one of the tools I know Kansas City was implementing when they watched that specific game, and that probably led to Kansas City winning a Super Bowl. So, through correlation, Bengals fans won't want to hear this, but that game helped Kansas City win the Super Bowl. There's a pattern of elite play when Burrow's healthy. So I think it's safe to say, like, we know exactly what he is at this point. What's around Burrow on paper does look improved. And as a play caller, I know you mentioned a new OC, but Zach Taylor I thought was phenomenal last season doing what he did with Jake Browning. It kind of said to me, hey, maybe, we're thinking of Zach a little bit too lightly here. Personnel-wise, you see their GM, Duke Tobin, he doubles down at right tackle to solve that problem. He signs Trent Brown in free agency, and when healthy, he's a massive upgrade. Trent was cleared to practice earlier this week. But there is a greater than 50% chance, if you're following this, that Amarius Mims starts.
They love him.
The first-round pick.
Love him right now. The reports coming out of camp. Rave reviews.
Everyone loves him. I'm higher on Mims, I think.
Than Nick Saban?
Most know that from our college podcasts. The guy just oozes talent. Right? He's 6'8", 3'4". He's a good kid. I think the Bengals eventually move on from Orlando Brown after this season, and that's really why they drafted Amarius Mims. They signed Trent Brown. They're like, oh, that's going to be our right tackle. We'll let Mims, kind of cook, so to speak, for a year, and then he's going to come in and be our left tackle. Cincy fans got the glimpse, on Orlando Brown. He's got serious holes in his game. He's not worth the price point. Gave up an 8.3% pressure rate on pass block snaps last season, and then you just look in totality, it was his worst season as a full-time starter last year. Cordell Volson, nearly 2,200 snaps of below replacement level ball at left guard. Ted Karras, plus center, not elite. Alex Kappa, nice guard, not great. That foursome has to play to the contract and draft capital spent. The one position that this organization has thrown money at and doubled down through the draft the last 4 years is offensive line. And that's partly why Joe Burrow can't stay on the field as much as we'd like. The O-line, if you look, has finished 29th, 30th, and 27th in 4 consecutive years in pass block win rate. The weapons are great, right? It's Chase and Higgins, fantastic 1-2 punch. That is obvious. I think your hope is that everyone pulls in the same direction. Jamar Chase hasn't shown up to camp. He wants a new deal. T. Higgins begrudgingly signed his franchise tag. He is quite literally putzing around in camp, I'm told. Looks lethargic. The other skill positions...
I respect that.
...are getting the most burn right now. Burrow's formed an early connection with Mike Gesicki. Andre Usivash has had a monster camp. He has the inside track to be wide receiver 3 and 11 personnel. Jermaine Burton has flashed. Burrow claims this is the most offensive depth since he's been there. Chase Brown, you hinted at the top. He is everyone's favorite breakout candidate. Just remember that when your draft rolls around, you're not the first guy on Plymouth Rock. Brown's burst and explosiveness is eye-popping. I can see why everyone's gravitating towards him, and I hope he has a great year. Last year, it was a very small sample size. 11% of his rush attempts went 10-plus yards. More than 9% went 15-plus. The upside there is fantastic, and if you can be in this offense as a running back, you're going to produce. Just ask Joe Mixon, who kind of wasn't very good as a running back the last 2 years, but the numbers were. I'm interested to see a larger sample size because the Bengals' offensive line was actually good creating some room, and they were top 10 in run block win rate. But Chase Brown averaged less than 0.8 yards before first contact. It would indicate there's a need for greater patience and vision. And while it's extremely early, you saw Zach Moss was listed as RB1 in the Bengals' first depth chart released earlier this week. He's a solid veteran back. He's been above replacement level each of his first 4 seasons in the league. So I don't know if this is like fully Chase Brown's job as RB1 workhorse here. The offense is ultimately going to go as Burrow does, right? But I think what's nice from a schedule perspective, the Bengals go from facing the most difficult schedule in the league to the 6th easiest. It's the largest delta of any team year over year. There is no reason Cincinnati doesn't stack wins with a healthy Burrow, an improved offensive line, and a receiver group that's focused on football and team. But since 2020, those 3 things have never happened in unison, Todd.
No, and you mentioned the running back situation. Chase Brown, for me, has all the makings of a running back that gets the ball from the 20 to 20. But if you're expecting him, as it stands right now, to get those goal line touches, I think you'll be hard-pressed to see him in short yardage situations, knowing that Zach Moss can put his head down and try and run through defenders, given Chase Brown wanting to bounce everything outside to look for the home run. Something that we saw on full display even when he ran behind a good offensive line at Illinois in Brett Bielema's offense as well. Defensively, Payne, when we look at this Bengals team, struggled a little bit in terms of allowing 4.6 yards per carry to opposing running backs, was 29th in the league last year, 26th in yards before contact. You highlighted one of the key contributors who's no longer with the organization to their run defense having success in the past. That, of course, was DJ Reader, proved to be one of the best run defense in the league with him. Fell completely off the table with him being injured or missing extensive time. We know what Trey Hendrickson can do as one of the main disruptors, 17.5 sacks last season, tied for the second most in the league. They did lose a little bit of depth early on in camp. It was Cam Sample being lost for the season, and Zach Taylor called Sample's season-ending injury a huge loss to the Bengals' defensive line and what they want to do. But we've also sung the career resume and the praise of what Lou Anarumo has done in terms of making defensive adjustments. When you look at the Bengals stop unit in totality, do you believe this is a group capable of taking a step forward, or where will they end up slotting when we go through the schedule opponent by opponent?
Impossible to be much worse than last year.
Just be average, baby. Just be average.
It's possible. I admitted fault too soon, Todd. It's out there. I was not a Lou Anarumo guy initially. I had enough intel from his Dolphins days to feel good about that assessment. And then Lou really turned it around in 21 and 22, and the game plans were solid, and the halftime adjustments were off the charts. And those halftime adjustments effectively took another Super Bowl ring away from Reed and Mahomes. And you saw all over the place, like the sharpest minds are just lauding Lou. So I admitted fault. I think that's important in any market to make corrections and adjust. Now, we laughed very hard last year when Lou said he had a top 5 defense heading into the season. And I went back and actually listened to our Bengals preview. And one, I can't stand my voice. No clue how some of you have listened to us for over a decade. Seek help.
Hey, yeah, don't share that with our listeners as we're approaching episode 700 for the Bet the Board franchise. That'll be here before we know it.
But our conclusion last year was we thought Cincy had a slightly above average defense. And boy, were we wrong. The Bengals defense was horrific. Lou Anarumo was terrible. Cincy finished dead last in early down defense, dead last in schedule adjusted yards per play allowed, mostly because a pass defense that was dead last in explosive play prevention. And there were no excuses. The Bengals had one of the healthiest defenses in the league. You mentioned DJ Reader. He was healthy, played over 500 snaps in 14 games, and the Bengals still couldn't stop a nosebleed on the ground. 26th in yards allowed per rush before first contact. If you remember the linebacker duo, which is still there, Jermaine Pratt and Logan Wilson, they came back to reality. So for anyone that shorted stock on those two not having career years simultaneously, again, they cashed in. They're average linebackers, but they're scheme fit. They're familiar with the scheme. There's just little to no depth at the linebacker position to where Jordan Battle is being discussed in a reserve role at that position when he's not playing safety. The defensive line, to me, is concerning, and maybe it won't be. But I mentioned the run-stopping woes, and DJ Reader, as you mentioned, moved on to Detroit. Cincy was also 23rd in pass rush win rate. Sam Hubbard, I get he's the local hero, and he is a high-floor guy, but the ceiling is kind of low there. And he left on a cart with a knee injury Sunday night. It's being reported as a week-to-week injury. We'll see. Trey Hendrickson demanded a trade this offseason. He wants a new deal. He was seen on stage with Luke Combs at a concert shotgunning beers this past weekend. He's dinged up and not practicing right now. You mentioned Cam Sample. He was the third man in that rotation, tore his Achilles, out for the year. Sheldon Rankins is the Reader replacement inside, but over his last 4 seasons struggled to stop the run and be an efficient tackler. B.J. Hill is really solid, but he's not elite. And there's going to be a massive reliance on all the kids, right? Zach Carter was the 3rd-round pick in 2022, nearly 900 snaps of below replacement ball his first 2 seasons. Chris Jenkins and McKinley Jackson were taken in rounds 2 and 3 this past April. They have to contribute right away. Miles Murphy was the 29th pick last season. We talked about his camp struggles. Heading into last season, he played 300-plus snaps. It was below replacement level. He was actually running with the 3rd team again until all of these issues on the edge started happening. The secondary struggled with Jesse Bates moving on to Atlanta. Awuzie wasn't fully recovered from the ACL tear. I do like that Cincy brings in 2 veterans at safety. Geno Stone from Baltimore. He's had back-to-back seasons of positive play was fantastic in coverage last year, 53 passer rating allowed when closest in coverage. Does struggle in run support, though. Von Bell is back. He had a season in Carolina, but he played over 3,000 snaps for the Bengals from 2020 to 2022. He's a professional. And I mentioned Jordan Battle. He was the bright spot for the Bengals secondary, so I think he starts alongside Stone, but TBD there. Maybe those veteran safeties, as I think about this out loud a little bit, allow Lou Anarumo to get back on track, right? A lot of those halftime adjustments were made with exotic changes in coverage. And when you're playing all kids in the back end and you're asking them to adjust on the fly, maybe Lou couldn't implement what he wanted, and now with Stone and Bell, you can do that, and their impact is larger than the metrics would indicate, but it's something to monitor there. At corner, you have Cam Taylor-Britt and DJ Turner. They have to improve on the outside. You saw flashes from Britt. It was just kind of feast or famine. He only allowed a 53% catch rate when targeted, but when he gave up a catch, it was deep, 9.2 yards per target surrendered. DJ Turner struggled as a rookie, 112 passer rating allowed. The Dax Hill experiment at safety, that has come to an end. He's pivoting to a depth role at corner. We like Mike Hilton back in the slot, damn good player, one of the better slot corners in the league. You have rookie Dejon Anthony. He's been the camp star so far, running with the first team in dime packages, but he's a 7th-round pick. So I immediately wonder if a 7th-round rookie getting burned with the first team in certain packages is because he's so great or there's a void in talent. This is what's really hard for me. Like, I don't necessarily love the parts of the Bengals defense, especially with all the issues along the defensive line right now. The positive is this. It's impossible to be worse than last year. There's only 32 teams. But Burrow being back should alleviate some of the defensive pressure. The Bengals project to face one of the 5 easiest schedules of passing offenses and offenses overall. And look, I came into this season wanting to buy the Bengals, right? Zach Taylor gained my trust after what he did with Browning. Burrow back healthy. Schedule is cake. I thought about a win total. Started looking at MVP prices for Burrow. I just never got there because I need to see the offensive line improve. Chase and Higgins have to get past their contracts. The defensive line scares me with all those situations I mentioned going on. And so ultimately, I passed on tying up my money for 6 months here.
It's an interesting team. And to your point, it's no doubt a group getting a lot of buzz for a lot of the reasons that we've outlined, most notably the return of Joe Burrow. But can they live up to some of those expectations, even with a schedule on paper that looks to be a lot more favorable going forward than some of their division compatriots? You can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there as well. But most importantly, as always, for all things Bet the Board, be sure to follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. If you're just catching up on your NFL previews, we're partway through. College football, done and dusted. Every division in the kind of depth that you've come to expect from the Bet the Board home offices. Brad Powers does an outstanding job with the G5 conferences. The Holy Trinity of Payne, myself, and Brad dive into all Power 4 leagues. If you're looking for some NASCAR information, we've got you covered there. And I want to encourage all of you, if you haven't already done so, to sign up for the Bet the Board podcast newsletter. Payne tweeted it out. I tweeted it out. It's on the Bet the Board feed, delivered to your inbox, absolutely free every Friday throughout the fall. Some additional best bet information, reminders if you may have missed some of our content during the week. It's easy as 1, 2, 3. Sign up, have that newsletter in your inbox each and every week, and it will make you a better and more informed bettor all football season long, both in the college and professional ranks. On to the
Friday the 9th, I believe, is the first one going out.
So tomorrow, Friday, August 9th.
That would be tomorrow. Yes, there will be a win total in there.
Look at that, people. A little bonus content there. So make sure you're signed up already and locked and loaded to try and turn in your most profitable season to date. The Cleveland Browns, Payne, when we look at the Browns win total, 8.5, shaded to the over. They are underdogs to make the playoffs, right around plus $1.50. And third shot on the board to win the division, prices of 4-1 or greater, widely available for Kevin Stefanski, who will look to defend his Coach of the Year crown and get Cleveland back to the playoffs. The last image we had of the Browns last year was getting absolutely torched at the hands of the Houston Texans on the road in the postseason. The Browns are seeking their first division title since 1989. It's the longest active drought in the NFL. They're also looking to string together consecutive winning seasons for the first time since 1988 to 89. Team overachieved last year based on some of the score margin, including going 5-0 in games decided by a field goal or less. But you look at the Browns allocating the most cap space to a quarterback of any team in the cap era. Second team ever last year, though, to make the playoffs with 5 different starting quarterbacks joining the 1984 Chicago Bears. Home cooking did them well, 8-1 in their own building, holding their opponents to less than 2 touchdowns per game. Defense cratered a bit on the road, contributing to that 3-6 record. When we look at some of the personnel changes, gone is everybody's favorite comeback player of the year in Joe Flacco. In are Jerry Jeudy, Jameis Winston, Tyler Huntley. Defensively, they add Jordan Hicks and Quentin Jefferson. And when we look at this roster from top to bottom, one of the more talented that you will see in the league. But Payne, I know it's low-hanging fruit, but I have to ask you the most simple and straightforward question. Can Ken Dorsey fix Deshaun Watson and allow him to start to scratch the surface of that lucrative contract and the kind of quarterback play that we saw that elevated him to one of the elite pivots in the entire league when he was under center for the Houston Texans?
I think the situation's larger than the offensive coordinator.
Shocking.
Listen, I mean, Kevin Stefanski continues exceeding expectation relative to what he's actually working with. And I thought it was well-deserved that he won Coach of the Year, and what he pulled off last year was a miracle. And I'm sure people from afar see the collection of talent, which you mentioned, and think better results should be produced. But offensively, the Browns went through hell last year. 5 different quarterbacks took snaps. Only one had a stretch of playing 5 games straight, so there was no consistency. And then you think about the skill sets of all these quarterbacks. And Stefanski basically had to change the offense on the fly because Watson, DTR, and Walker couldn't be more different than Flacco. And I mean that on the football field. The engine of the offense, you have Nick Chubb. What was he out, I think, after the second game?
Yeah, that really gruesome knee injury against the Steelers. Yikes.
I'm a Minkah Fitzpatrick guy, but that seemed avoidable, that hit. And then you had your starting right tackle, Jack Conklin, played 22 snaps all season. You had the starting left tackle, Jedrick Wills, played just 8 games. And so in totality, right, the Browns had the 5th most injured offense. And I mentioned Monday on the AFC East preview that OC Alex Van Pelt became the fall guy for the Browns front office and GM. And I think that's probably the starting point, because something we've said since the moment Cleveland traded for Deshaun Watson is it didn't make sense from a scheme or location fit. And so, for a minute, forget the draft capital and the salary cap ramifications, even though that is massive. This felt like a video game trade you'd make as a kid playing Madden. And, Kevin Stefanski's perfect offense is heavy personnel. It's the exotic run game. It's disguise and deception. It's play action. And the offense Deshaun Watson's best running is shotgun and pistol, 3 and 4 wide, eyes downfield. It's all Watson ran at Clemson. It's virtually all Watson ran indoors in Houston. And then from a location fit, I understand maybe a new stadium gets approved and it's built in 2028. But 3 and 4 wide shotgun offenses don't fare as well in the lakes of Cleveland compared to an indoor stadium in Houston. 12 personnel football fits with that weather substantially better. And so when I think about this season, year 3 of the Watson experiment, I think it's now or never for Stefanski and Watson. But at this stage, at least for me, Watson hasn't shown an ability to be good enough to dictate the offense Cleveland runs. Watson, he just hasn't been so electric operating his preferred offense that Stefanski can't go back to his preference of heavier sets. And Watson has been so bad operating out of 3 wide in Cleveland that, you start to look at this. He's actually been better running Stefanski's heavy offense. The numbers are better with 12, as shocking as that sounds. And you just kind of look at Watson. And I understand he's dealt with some injuries and the environment's changed and there's been some off-field stuff. But Watson last year, QB 25 in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation in totality. Why is he dictating what's run at this point? And I think we discussed
230 million reasons why Watson is dictating things, unfortunately, for the Browns.
Effectively, corporate America has taken over the Browns, right? That's what this is. And I think, we discussed boom and bust metrics on our college pod, but a boom play is one that yields at least +1 EPA, a bust at least -1 EPA per play. And so when Watson had a picture-perfect situation last season, meaning he had no pressure to deal with, 13% of the time it led to a bust play. That was QB 35. So I think it's time to let Stefanski run his best offense, make Deshaun adapt. And again, Deshaun's been better in Cleveland running 12. But this offseason, and this is a long way of getting to your main question there, it feels like the organization has doubled down, right? They bring in Ken Dorsey, who comes over from Buffalo, and he runs heavy shotgun, RPO, 11 personnel, and he's done it with the likes of Cam Newton and then obviously Josh Allen. Organization goes out, trades for Jerry Jeudy to operate out of the slot. So those are kind of two tells that the organization wants 11 personnel. The rest of the offense is health dependent. I mentioned Conklin and Wills at the tackle position. Stefanski claims both will play week 1. Neither has taken a snap in camp to this point. Conklin, to me, is the far better player than Wills, but you have DeJuan Hand, who did a good enough job in that right tackle spot last year, and he's going to eventually take Conklin's job because he's younger and cheaper. Wills is solid. He looks lazy at times, and the body language is horrible. 7% pressure rate allowed on pass block snaps the last 2 seasons. The inside trio of Bitonio, Posick, and Teller return, and that is a really, really fine group. Running back room is messy right now. Chubb's not going to be ready for the start of the season. Fuhrman and Hines were brought in to kind of bridge that gap. Fuhrman was airlifted after an injury, and Stefanski says he has no clue when he's going to return. Hines is still rehabbing a torn ACL from a jet ski accident. And so Jerome Ford went from cut candidate, because he was terrible last year, 29% success rate on 204 rushes, to being in the mix again. And I think the running back room is vital here because they have to produce. The Browns face a bottom 5 schedule of run defenses this season. So that running back room needs to figure itself out. Pass catching group I like, right? That trio of Cooper, Njoku, and Jeudy. I'm always higher on Amari Cooper than Market. 7 seasons of 1,000 yards, had the most receiving yards of his career last year with a mash unit at QB, over 2.3 yards per route run. He plays through just about every injury. Njoku's a matchup nightmare, finished 7th among qualifying tight ends in yards per route run. And then Jeudy, I was actually on a plane with him the other day, if you can believe this. Good guy. But there's some things that off the field are a little questionable. There are some issues in the locker room, but one thing, if he can get it all figured out, he's electric after the catch. Finished fringe top 10 in yak per reception. Very good route runner. Has that ability to stop and start on a dime. Finished top 15 in target separation. So you can see an analytical organization find some of these numbers and say, hey, we're going to buy low on Jeudy. We know Denver doesn't want him. When I look big picture, I just get back to, you got to give Stefanski the benefit of the doubt to figure this out. Ken Dorsey's philosophy meshes with Watson's better than Van Pelt. Personality-wise, it's a better fit, too. And I think even if Watson isn't what he was in Houston, and nobody expects that, Watson's light years better than the combination of DTR and Walker. They attempted 223 combined passes last season. Get this, Todd. They finished QBs 48 and 49 out of 49 qualifying quarterbacks in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation. So even if you can get Watson back to a serviceable level in that slightly below average, slightly above average window, you're going to see this offense hopefully take off.
Pretty solid when you compare that with Deshaun Watson over the last 2 seasons amongst 45 quarterbacks with 300-plus attempts that finished 41st in completion percentage, 36th in yards per attempt, and 38th in yards per game. So it has been a problem,
it's not been good,
to say the least. And, Payne, our listeners can believe Jerry Jeudy was on the same flight as you, because when you invite someone on your private jet, there's a good chance that you're going to interact with them. In some capacity.
By the way, I'm glad you got it. We figured out we were talking Browns, because when we were doing Bengals, you said Browns, and I understand the traumatic feeling when a bird shits on you that in your mind.
Hey, look,
Browns,
it happens
but
when you decide to don all whites in Mexico for a pre-wedding event, and a bird shits on you walking to the event. You can only hope it means one thing, and that's a 70% strike rate for us across college football and the NFL. Since everyone tells me it's good luck.
What was going on there? You're doing some Matador stuff in the post-wedding festivities? What's going on
No
there?
Matador stuff. I had my white shorts on. I had my white shirt and a bird.
To a wedding.
It was not the wedding. It was the pre-wedding
Oh.
festivities. It was an all-white party. And so thankfully I had a backup alternative because I had great coaching from you and my lovely wife about this carry-on life that you have both forced me to try and buy into. And I get a little bit apprehensive that I'm not going to have some of the flexibility in wardrobe choices when I'm not checking a 65-pound suitcase even for a 4-day vacation most of the time.
Roll, tuck, and wheel, my friend. That's the key to travel.
Apparently so. And I was able to deliver and make sure that I had a contingency plan in place. And the Browns may need a contingency plan on defense because, Payne, this group was absolutely gashed through the air when they went on the road. You look at what this team did, though, and we may as well start with the positive. They were ranked number 1 in non-sack EPA, the best mark since the 2019 Patriots. They accomplished those results while ranking 27th in overall health. When we look at the yards per game allowed, 270.2 was the fewest by any team since the Seahawks back in 2014. Led the NFL in total defense as a franchise for the first time since 1955. Highest opponent 3-and-out percentage since the 2005 Titans. Fewest yards per drive allowed since the 2008 Steelers. Fewest first downs per game allowed since the 2009 Jets. Second in pressure rate, 6th in sacks. But you said something that I felt got a little bit discounted last year, and we would break the Browns down in some of their higher profile games, that the numbers suggested one thing, but the eye test didn't tell you it was an elite unit, and that was on full display when the Houston Texans did what they wanted when they wanted under rookie quarterback C.J. Stroud in that playoff game.
So, we thought the Browns' defense would be really improved last season, and it was, right? Especially if you blend everything together and then zoom out, right? They were second in schedule-adjusted efficiency, second in early down defense, second in pass defense, and they were very good on late downs. But there were, to your point, obvious deficiencies as well, right? There's this drastic week-to-week variance pending opponent and even venue to a degree. And the run defense, for instance, right? Like on the surface, looks damn good. They were first in yards allowed per rush before first contact. But the Browns tackled so poorly that they ended up bottom 10 in the league in explosive run defense and yards allowed per running back attempt. And then you look, Cleveland grades out 24th in tackling. And you just start to look at some of the key cogs that played the most snaps, right? Zadarius Smith played nearly 600, had a 28% missed tackle rate. Garrett, Delpit, Emerson, and Newsome were all 700-plus snap guys. Each had a missed tackle rate in the high teens. So you got to improve the basics, right, this year. If you're the Browns, you got to tackle better. And then there were massive splits based on opponent. And, if you're listening to this and it's like, sure, it's hard to defend better offenses than bad. And I get it. But now we're able to, with all the data, right, gauge performance relative to expectation. And, when you're facing a better offense, the expectation's a little lower. When you're facing a bad offense, the expectation's a little higher. And that's kind of how you can get there. The Browns terrorized the worst offenses on their schedule, especially, in the dog pound. But the Colts and the Broncos and the Rams and the Texans, especially the second time around, had some of their best offensive performances of the entire season against the Browns. There was just too much variance there. And, the timing of when Cleveland played some of these offenses were really wildly beneficial as well. And so, you think week 1, Joe Burrow nursing the calf injury, and then week 6, Debo goes down, and the 49ers game plan is completely dashed. And I get it, it's football, it's an attrition sport. But if you're watching, I believe it's called Receiver, that documentary, they talk specifically about that game, and they were like, yeah, our game plan was completely shattered. It was a massive Debo week. And then you host the Jets without Aaron Rodgers, and you host Jacksonville with Trevor Lawrence nursing that significant knee sprain. So there were some benefits to when Cleveland's defense played these offenses. And I do believe this is a really good Browns defense, and I think it's good again. But the delta in performance, I think, had to be discussed because Cleveland plays a schedule of offenses that projects to finish top 10 this season. And I wonder if Jim Schwartz, who I do this a lot, I liken it to a fastball pitcher that throws 100, his scheme and players can overwhelm lesser hitters. But the elite sit dead red and can knock it out of the park. And we saw the second time through when Houston was expecting a 100-mile-an-hour fastball, right? They knocked it out of the park. And so if you know it's coming, now that he's in year 2 with virtually the same players, it leaves me questioning some things. I think the hope is that adding Mike Vrabel helps with some of the predictability of the Browns defense. And I know Vrabel's been helping the Browns special teams and offense more than defense in camp, but there was a direct quote from Shorts, and it was, Vrabel is going to make a major contribution to this defense, being a second set of eyes, a sounding board, and filling in the gaps. From a talent perspective, I mentioned it, virtually everyone returns. We know what Myles Garrett is, number 2 in pass rush win rate, 17% pressure rate on pass rush snaps. He had 15 sacks. He sets the edge extremely well. Could be the best in the business. Shelby Harris is back in the middle, plus run stopper. Maybe where the concern up front is with the injuries. You have the big fella, Delvin Tomlinson, had his knee scoped. He's likely going to miss, week 1. The Browns do have vets inside with Jefferson and Hurst, along with the second-round pick, rookie Mike Hall. Hurst had his best season as a pro. Good to see that after some issues early in his career with the ticker there. Zadarius Smith was carted off the field Monday with a knee injury. They're calling it a contusion, but it sounds like for the time being a major knee injury was avoided, so that's a positive. In the back, Greg Newsome needed hamstring surgery in late July. I can't envision he plays week 1, but Schwartz isn't ruling it out, so we'll see there. But aside from everyone being back, right, you have JOK at linebacker. Quickness, speed, fantastic as a blitzer and in coverage. You have Ward Delp at Thornhill, Emerson in the back. Thornhill, I thought, was a fantastic addition last season. It was really good coming downhill. One of the best tacklers on the team, which was needed. Ward only allowed 51% of targets to be caught. Ogbo was solid in a rotational role off the edge. His pressure rate on pass rush snaps did dip compared to his 2022 season in Houston. They're going to need him if Smith misses some time. But bottom line here, the Browns should have another top 7-8 defense. Can you improve from that? Maybe. The key is just being more consistent week to week, especially with the uptick in offenses faced here.
When you look at this Browns team overall, and I know this is a little bit more sports talk radio stuff than anything else, what do you need to see from Deshaun Watson if you're in that Browns front office before you go, you know what, let's admit the mistake, rip the Band-Aid off, and decide, we've seen enough of this, and we're not going to continue to pay him in the final 3 years of his deal if this team happens to go 7-10 and Deshaun Watson underwhelms yet again?
Yeah, that's kind of what I said in passing at the top there, that this is a massive year for the Stefanski-Watson duo. And you start to look at how Watson is hitting the cap. And if you start having seasons where he's, in the bottom 10 of all quarterbacks and a lot of key metrics, it's time to move on. I think Cleveland would be fools if they chose the quarterback over the coach, because I really respect Stefanski, and I think his model and his play is certainly better for the elements. And this organization was down on their luck until Stefanski stepped in, and you don't win Coach of the Year for no reason. I think the roster's talented, and I believe in Stefanski to stack some wins this season, but certainly Deshaun Watson needs to up his rate of play. It sounds like he is healthier. I know they're starting to ramp up his throwing a little bit. Through the offseason, they were limiting what he did, and in camp he was sitting out some drills, but now it's starting to ramp up, so hopefully that shoulder is healthy.
Yeah, if you read the camp reports, erratic, probably the best word I could use to describe the way the Browns...
Jameis has looked substantially better.
The way the Browns people talk about it, and speaking to people close to that organization, the feedback I've been given on Deshaun Watson leaves a little bit to be desired, so we'll see if he goes out there and the light completely flips on for him going forward.
Busy financing his wife's rap career.
Well, look, we all have hobbies. It may take away from our primary focus, but that's neither here nor there when it comes to Watson and what Browns fans want to see out of one of the league's more talented rosters, and it will be time to pay the piper for them going forward. We didn't talk about one of the big storylines, Payne, and we'll get to the Pittsburgh Steelers in a second, but I may as well ask you, because the two teams he's been most closely linked to for Brandon Ayuk, the Cleveland Browns, who we just broke down, and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Have we heard anything? Do we think this deal gets done? Is it imminent, or is there a real path where Ayuk returns to San Francisco to play out his contract?
I think it's 50-50 right now. And
that he stays or that he gets traded, or 50-50 ends up with the Steelers or Browns?
There you go. Yeah. I think it's more Steelers or stays. Okay. That's kind of the vibe I'm getting right now.
Very fair way, and it'll lead us right into our Pittsburgh Steelers breakdown. A team whose win total sits at 8.5, heavily shaded to the under. They're long shots to make the playoffs. 4th on the board in this particular division. And when you look at their price to finish atop the heap in the AFC North, prices north of 7-1 widely available on the Steelers. And this is a team going to look a little bit different. Make changes at the quarterback position, bring in Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, add a Swiss Army knife of sorts and Cordarrelle Patterson, Mitch Trubisky, Deontay Johnson, Mason Rudolph, all gone on the offensive side. Defensively, add Patrick Queen and Dante Jackson. Patrick Peterson no longer with them. And when we talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers, it's a franchise that's now gone 20 straight seasons without a losing record, one shy of tying the 1965 to 1985 Dallas Cowboys for the longest streak in NFL history. They have, however, lost 5 straight playoff games, which is the longest streak in Pittsburgh Steelers history. First team with 30 points allowed in 5 straight playoff games in NFL history as well. Only one of those contests has been decided by single digits. 35 straight seasons without finishing last in the division. It is the longest streak in NFL history by 10 years. And this is a Steelers team, though, that found themselves playing from behind the 8 ball more often than not, with an offense that left plenty to be desired with Matt Canada as the offensive coordinator, even when they made the changes. You look at the Steelers' schedule, this team will be an underdog, at least on paper, the way things look right now, in 7 of their final 8 games to close the season. One of the more difficult finishing stretches to close a campaign that includes all 6 divisional games taking place week 11 or later. But Payne, if the Steelers are going to fix their offense, it may not be because they bring in Russell Wilson or Justin Fields. They bring in everyone's favorite offensive coordinator, former head coach of the Atlanta Falcons, Arthur Smith, to try and take this team out of the Stone Ages and improve on the 17.9 points per game last season that we saw, the fewest by a 10-plus win team since the 2005 Chicago Bears.
So we know Matt Canada is out, and that's someone that we've repeatedly crushed for 3 seasons. And in is our favorite trust fund baby, Arthur Smith. I think this is a clear upgrade, regardless of what anyone else is saying. The bar for better, though, is really low. I think that's more of an indictment of Matt Canada than it is Arthur Smith being great. But I do believe, again, it's an upgrade. I mean, Matt Canada should have just gave opposing defenses his play sheet every single week along with the game plan, and the results probably would have been about the same. And I think we outlined this to a T multiple times the last few seasons, but it truly was as simple as when Pittsburgh's in shotgun, it's passed 92% of the time on early downs. Under center, it's run 85% of the time on early downs, and no surprise, the Steelers are bottom 5 in early down offense. And it leads to a ton of long-distance third downs, and Pittsburgh was bottom 10 in late down offense. Kenny Pickett was aided by play action on just 16% of dropbacks. That was the 4th lowest rate among 45 qualifying quarterbacks. The poor kid never had a chance. Like, it is a cheat code for all quarterbacks, especially young quarterbacks trying to gain some confidence. And Canada didn't do anything. Arthur Smith, again, to me, is an upgrade, but I think what's interesting is it feels very much like a controlling hire by Mike Tomlin. Like, it's going to be an offense with a Tomlin governor on it. There's still going to be lots of running, and that's just Arthur Smith's MO. If you look, Atlanta had the lowest pass rate over expectation last season. Based on down and distance, Arthur Smith called the pass nearly 10% below the expected rate. Atlanta had the 2nd highest run rate in the league, which is surprising for a team that trailed at a well above average rate. What's going to be drastically different is the scheme, right? Like, we know what Arthur Smith is at this point. We have enough sample size in Tennessee and Atlanta, and it's going to be a ton of heavy formations. It's going to be a lot of motion. It's going to be a lot of play action passes, far more downfield passes. And this is why I'm a touch higher on Arthur Smith relative to what's being talked about him publicly. And it's that his system meshes with the Steelers' personnel better than I could have envisioned until I just deep dived this thing, right? If you look, the Steelers' offense improved last season to 12th in run block win rate. And the entire world knew they were running, and the O-line still got above average push. It's a good sign. There's lots of competition up front this year as well. The depth is much improved. If you looked at the first Steelers depth chart released, it still had Dan Moore at left tackle, Broderick Jones at right tackle with Nate Herbig, James Daniels, and Isaac Semaleo inside. In a perfect world, the Steelers want Broderick to side to the left, where he'll get preseason reps, and then first-round pick Troy Fontenot slides to right tackle. Zach Frazier, the second-round pick from West Virginia, has been getting some first-team reps at center. We'll see if he can overtake Herbig, who's kind of been a journeyman. I've seen projections for the Steelers' offensive line in the 20s some places. I think it's better than that with the young options pushing, and I think that's a positive for a run-first offense. The second is heavy personnel, 2 tight end sets. The Steelers have Pat Freiermuth, Darnell Washington, and Connor Hayward. Those 3 actually graded out the Steelers' best pass blockers last season. I would expect Freiermuth's target share to increase in a massive way. He's healthy. He went out to the West Coast this offseason with Russ and got acclimated with him, and they just threw the ball around. So the point is, like, 3 solid options for Art to employ 12 and 13 personnel. Running back room has Jalen Warren and Najee Harris. Warren finished second in yards created among qualifying running backs, only behind Devon Achane. These 2 backs, I think, have a chance to feast because the one area where the schedule actually lightens for the Steelers' offense is on the ground, projected to face a bottom 5 schedule of run defenses. And the one thing you will get from Arthur Smith's run-first offense is when he does dial up pass, he's asking his quarterbacks to push it past the line of scrimmage. Atlanta was top 5 in rate of throws that traveled 5+ air yards. Russell Wilson still likes to throw the moon ball, right? If you look last year, 8th among 40 quarterbacks in percentage of 20+ yard throws, graded out 11th throwing the deep ball. Russ was 3rd in EPA on early downs on throws 5+ yards downfield, and that's a positive. He just didn't throw it downfield enough. Supposedly, he's progressing well from the calf injury. He's still slotted as QB1. Justin Fields has looked very good as well. I am sure Art is going to have some goal line packages, regardless if he doesn't win the job over Russ, where Justin Fields can start moving those legs and using him as a weapon that way. You look at the receiver room. Pitt has a hungry guy in George Pickens. He is dying to catch the deep ball, especially when it's contested. 2.1 yards per route run last season. There's been some talks of moving Pickens around the formation a little bit more this season. It wouldn't shock me, right? Like, Canada didn't do anything to disguise a single thing. Kelvin Austin runs 4.3. Roman Wilson runs 4.3. Hopefully his ankle injury progresses to where he'll make a rookie season impact. You have Van Jefferson. He reunites with Arthur Smith. He's shown out a little bit through the early part of camp and is on the field in 2 receiver sets for now. The receiver depth is concerning, but again, Art used the least amount of 3 wide sets in the NFL last season, and we talked about this at the top. The Steelers are working on acquiring Brandon Ayuk, which would completely change the calculus of the Steelers' receiver room. Here's the problem a little bit. The schedule gets tougher from a passing perspective. Pittsburgh slotted to face the toughest schedule of pass rushing defenses and a fringe top 5 schedule of pass defenses. So this is one of those situations where stock arrow up on the Steelers' offense, but it's likely negated by the heightened schedule of defenses outweighing the improvement, if that makes sense. But in terms of what Art Smith wants to do and the personnel, it feels like a better fit than how Art Smith is being talked about publicly right now.
I mean, look, if you go through and try and follow some of the national narrative around the Steelers, and I know we'll get to the defensive side of the ball in just a moment, I mean, they're a clear-cut number 4 team in this division that people are writing off for dead already in terms of running over men, women, and children to bet them under their win total. You know, I came in not expecting much when I broke down the offense, but, you know, have very similar sentiments to you that I think this is a group where not much is being expected, and they have the potential to go out there with a manageable schedule. When I think the term you used before we started recording is that if they're going to have a decent season, you got to stack wins early, even on the road against some of the opponents, because things get to be a lot more difficult on the back end. And I'm not quite sure, Payne, when you break this team down defensively, they're capable of masking some of the deficiencies if the offense doesn't achieve what they need to, led by Terrell Austin as defensive coordinator. I mean, this was a defensive coordinator, This was a group that was 9th in points allowed per drive last year, 11th in pressure rate, 8th in takeaways, 9th in defensive EPA over the last 3 seasons. But they found a way to come up with those properly timed turnovers and a little bit of variance that I don't think you can count on more often than not I mean, they forced turnovers in the fourth at a ridiculous rate and allow the offense to capitalize on short fields. Now, when you begin to look at their defensive personnel, we know it starts and stops with TJ Watt as a difference maker. The Steelers are just 1-11 when he's out of the lineup going back to 2017. Third most sacks in his first 7 NFL seasons all time behind Reggie White and DeMarcus Ware. Only player in league history to lead this league in sacks 3 times. But elsewhere from a personnel standpoint, what do you make of the Steelers stopping at Payne? And is there reason to be optimistic that this group can trend up?
Well, just in your transition point there, I do think it's fair to point out why Pittsburgh is seeing a ton of under money, right? I mean, just surface level, it's very clear why that is, right? Schedule is the most difficult when you look at power ratings and team wins. You might not be high on Russell Wilson or Art Smith. The thought process that all of the luck metrics, right? Winning all of these one-score games, leading the league, and takeaways and things of that nature, both of those are going to regress. So you can see the overarching 2-minute handicap, and it's pretty simple. Specific to defense, I mean, it just continues winning the organization close games. And that's what people are partly bucking, right? Pittsburgh's an unheard of 34-11 in one-score games since 2020. And, that trend continues. The reason for the fade, because if it was any other team, that mark would be unsustainable. But you just are waiting for it to end, and every single year we fade these guys, and it doesn't come to fruition. I thought Pittsburgh's defense was well-rounded last season. 5th on early downs, 4th in red zone. Down to down, the pass defense was solid, above average against the run. It was, however, below average on the variance down, 3rd down. And the Steelers finished 30th in explosive pass defense, which is somewhat concerning, knowing it benefited from playing a below-average schedule of passing offenses. That was actually significantly worse than their rating because it faced so many of those teams' backup quarterbacks. Pittsburgh faced 7 backup QBs from week 9 onward. The EPA gain from turnovers was top 5 in the league. And again, for any other defense, you'd be calling for regression there. That's kind of how you're plotting this out year over year. What's causing my brain to waver here is, again, I like the personnel. Defensive line has serious depth at the edge. TJ Watt is just unstoppable. 25% pass rush win rate, 86 pressures and 20 sacks. Alex Smith, there were some questions over the last couple of years. Can he become that full-time edge to complement TJ Watt on the other side? The answer unequivocally is yes, right? Finished 12th in pass rush win rate last year. You think about the depth. Nick Herbig flashed in a big way. Pittsburgh just re-signed Marcus Golden, who graded out their 3rd best defender last season. It's just a really nice 4-man edge. Inside, the hope is Cam Hayward returns to health. I know he's 35 years old, so you would expect some drop-off, and the numbers dropped off the last 18 months or so, but he's been dealing with a lingering lower body injury all season. 2nd-round pick Keanu Benton had a fantastic rookie year, played nearly 500 snaps with Hayward's injury. Larry Ogunjobi is still there. He's a solid vet piece. The splash moves were at linebacker. We've mentioned Patrick Queen. Which version is Pittsburgh getting, right? The unplayable guy from 2020 and 2021, or the above replacement level player the last 2 seasons? And so I'm asking myself, did Queen truly get better, or did playing alongside Roquan Smith alleviate some pressure? I know Queen is certainly a personality fit there. Landon Roberts is a nice thumper, recorded a tackle on 22% of run snaps last season. The second splash at linebacker was 3rd-round pick Peyton Wilson. The talent is far superior than the 3rd-round pick, but the injury history prevented some teams from dabbling there. But I think the linebacker group inherently upgraded. Secondary should be improved. Joey Porter was thrown into the fire as a rookie, played over 800 snaps, surrendered a 46% reception rate when targeted and a 68 passer rating, created 7 havoc plays through the air to just 1 touchdown allowed. So you're hoping, right? 2nd season, feeling a little bit more comfortable, more confident after his rookie year. He takes that next step to be a shutdown corner. part of the Deontay Johnson trade to Carolina was getting corner Dante Jackson in return. Replacement level player, but it wouldn't shock me if Pittsburgh got the most out of him. You have an undrafted slot corner in Beanie Bishop. He's been the star of camp. He's running with the Steelers' first-team defense. He's going to be 25 years old. Played at 3 schools his final 3 seasons, Western Kentucky, Minnesota, and then West Virginia. He was solid at all 3 stops. The safety tandem of Minkah Fitzpatrick and Deshaun Elliott is really nice. Minkah only played 10 games last season, but he's just, a versatile chess piece. At his peak, one of the best safeties in the league. Deshaun Elliott has been above replacement level safety all 5 seasons in the league, had his best year in Miami last year. Going to have to check on him. He left yesterday's practice with an injury. Let's monitor that. Again, I like the personnel. There are some metrics that suggest regression, but if Pittsburgh cleans up third downs and their explosive pass defense, maybe that evens out a little bit. Bottom line, though, you hinted at the top, I mentioned it to you off air, got to stack wins early, because from week 11 onward, the Steelers' final 8 games are against teams with an average power rating of 6th. It'll be the inverse of last year facing 7 backup quarterbacks down the stretch. This year it's Lamar twice, Watson twice, Burrow twice, Mahomes and Hurts, all top 10 projected offenses. Defense, as we know, takes some energy and effort. And so not only is the back half of the season tough because of opponent with all of these high leverage games, Pittsburgh plays 7 games in 38 days. It's 5.4 days on average. From November 17th to December 25th, 4 of them are on the road. So I can absolutely understand the under money. I haven't gotten there yet, but I'm certainly not looking to buck other guys who have that opinion. There's no reason tying up money for 6 months in a battle. Week to week, I'm okay battling with guys because I know if I win, I can roll that money over continuously throughout the course of the season. But I don't want to tie my money up for 6 months.
The other thing that's interesting, too, when we talk about some of the battles and win totals in general, is we see more and more sportsbooks offering updated and adjusted regular season win totals. Look, this team could be the perfect candidate if they start the season extremely well, that you'll get an adjusted total that's a touch inflated, knowing how backloaded things may be, and the inverse may be true for a couple of the other teams that we've talked about in previous divisions as well. So take advantage of all of those tools that are widely available. If it was just 1 or 2 shops, I could understand the reluctance, but in this day and age, we see these win totals widely available, not just before the season starts, but throughout the course of the regular season. A lot of prominent shops doing it on a weekly basis, even through weeks 10, 11, 12, etc. So
that's a really good point. They are updating week to week now, and so that might be the perfect plan is hope they stack some wins early, hope there's a little odds maker error there, and then maybe you can go under at a readjusted number as the schedule starts to get a little bit more daunting.
Paid dividends for us last year, doing so with the Tennessee Titans, and we know there are candidates throughout the course of the season that'll present themselves during the marathon that is the NFL regular season. You can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. Follow me there as well. But again, most importantly, for all things Bet the Board, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod, and sign up and subscribe for the Bet the Board podcast newsletter. First edition drops tomorrow, which would be August 9th, just in time to get you ready for the football season. Additional win totals, props, what have you, right there to your inbox every week throughout the course of the fall. And Payne, this is the portion of the program where we flip gears and head to the best bet, broken down 4 teams in the AFC North as eloquently as in-depth as we know how to do. What have you found from a best bet perspective that we can share with our listeners?
So we say this all the time, every single year it seems. There's a possibility we don't have a best bet for every single preview podcast. We're going to try our best, but we have lived in the world where we're not going to just conjure something up for listens. It's going to be something we've actually bet with our hard-earned money or going to bet. And so we don't have anything for the AFC North, but this is going to be a little teaser, so I'm not going to provide a lot of information. But let's go over 10.5 wins on the Detroit Lions. NFC North preview is on Monday. We will break the Lions down in depth, both sides of the football.
There we go. Detroit Lions, it'll be a positive review of what you can expect in the Motor City going forward. But again, one of the more fascinating and intriguing divisions that we'll discuss. I know the Bears garnering all sorts of buzz on Hard Knocks, the talk about Jordan Love and that lucrative contract extension. And maybe the Minnesota Vikings won't be as bad as some of their preseason projections look like, at least on paper, as they continue to figure out their quarterback situation with the veteran and Sam Darnold and a very talented offensive mind. All right, my friend, anything else you'd like to share with our loyal listenership before we take a little break and reconvene on Monday for the NFC North preview?
Back on Monday.
Got it. So for Payne Insider, I'm Todd Fuhrman. Again, a shout-out to Billy filling in so admirably as analyst on Monday for the AFC East. We'll be back with you next Monday for a little NFC North breakdown. And most importantly, with whatever investments you choose to make in the AFC North, the best of luck. And with the Detroit Lions regular season win total ticket over the posted total in hand, we'll see you at the window.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Fuhrman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.